The Pacers dig deep for a 111-106 win to avoid falling into an 0-3 hole. Digging deeper, taking on many different meanings here. Hitting a deep three as a game winner from Andrew Nembhard. Deeper drives from various players on the roster, which we have talked about. And also, in my opinion, matching the grit of the New York Knicks with the starters on the floor down the stretch in the way that we have not seen in the first two games. So just for context, the starters actually have to dig out of a hole from the bench, which has been uncharacteristic, down 98-94 when all five starters go back on the floor. They end up outscoring the Knicks during those minutes. Siakam goes 4 of 5 at the free throw line. They get 3 offensive rebounds. Tyrese literally injures himself twice driving to the rim rather than not driving to the rim, perhaps because of injuries. So that's where we find ourselves after this game. So I guess what is the standout moment from you from the starters at the end of the game by comparison to what we've seen in the first two?
It's Tyrese affecting both ends. That pick six was like great read, unbelievable run of play for him. He's not going to be able to do that every game. It's not often that Tyrese is a game changer on both ends of the floor, but the best players read the game and find their opportunities. There are good players who are elite offensive players who struggle defensively, who make big defensive plays late in games sometimes. They know when to cheat. They know when to get after it. Tyrese really, was it 99-94? He turned it around completely with a run of play that it was like 3 plays back to back. That was the most meaningful. Pascal hitting free throws was huge. Putting pressure on guys going downhill was a really, really big deal. 78% is not like, oh, he's done it, but he's been navigating some sort of yips, some sort of whatever. I've covered basically his whole career. For a forward, went from a really good free throw shooter to an average free throw shooter to in these playoffs. It's just like a nightmare. 7 for 9 was a super big deal. 72% true shooting in a low scoring game. Super big deal. Miles, similar to Pascal, fine-tuning the offense, making sure that hey, I'm finishing plays. I'm available to allow for efficiency. Nembhard hitting a shot after his gather hit him in the mouth. I tweeted out, maybe more players should consider kissing the ball for good luck before they hoist the game winner. Nesmith got away with some stuff on Brunson, but I think was quite brilliant. And really great call to change that matchup. And Tyrese above all else. Just sublime game. Star stuff. Big game.
So for me, some standout moments that just weren't clutch time is even just from Miles out of this pick and pop read from Tyrese. Remember what I told you the last time when you asked me about Miles's driving game? And I said, I don't think I've seen him put the ball on the floor with his left from outside the 3-point line if somebody closes hard to his right. Maybe more than once. I remember him doing that against the Kings where he had a right to left cross and got inside the line. He did this twice against the Knicks in this game, being able to get all the way to the basket and going hard and drawing contact. And his athleticism can be somewhat random at times. Like when he gets rolling downhill, he can really elevate like that. But sometimes when he has to change directions, he can become a little bit awkward. But in those situations, then also just Tyrese very early on in the first quarter, they're forcing him left, snaking his dribble. That ends up being ice to switch effectively, and then still gunning when he gets the peel switch from DiVincenzo. These are not shots that we were seeing in the first two games. He obviously really wants to force his way right here on this possession, but to see him actually drive the switch without needing assistance from an extra screen and then split with, like we talked about, the amount of ground coverage that he uses, the low crafty gather to get all the way to the basket against this, not things we've been seeing in the prior games from him. I thought overall his movement looked a lot better up until the end of the game when he ended up turning his ankle and then landing hard on his back. And then, like you mentioned, against Pascal here, the Knicks continue to top lock Tyrese away from the ball pretty heavily. So in this game, Pascal's not being guarded by OG Anunoby. Lean into the mismatch and they're clearing out and letting him do what he does and draw free throws. And he actually is drawing the free throws and getting to the line. And then, of course, the big shot from Andrew Nembhard, as you mentioned, he bobbles the ball twice here. But to see him step back from 30 feet, just context from stats, I wrote an entire article about it. It's paywalled, but people can go read it if they would like. Did not make a three from 30 feet all season. He's made 5 unassisted threes the entire season. His expected field goal percentage versus his actual field goal percentage on shots that have been deep is 10% lower than what you would want. Also 10% lower when he takes at least one dribble in those situations. He takes 4 dribbles there, a very unprecedented shot for him to be able to knock down. Biggest shot of the series, biggest shot of his career in that moment. And to keep a lot of these things aren't clean, right? Like even Miles's big block at the end of the game, like he could have shot over the top of Jalen Brunson. He doesn't shoot it. Tyrese ends up getting a turnover out of a jump pass, which really would have hurt my sales on my t-shirts. And then he still chases down that play and gets the block. So digging deeper is the summary.
I know it's not basketball. Andrew Nembhard has a really great smile. That, like, he was, the 3 went up, just beaming. What a moment, really. And it's the first second round game that Indiana has hosted in a long time. They got there. You get that shot. Imagine being a Pacers fan. I know there's Pacers fans watching. Probably somebody who attended the game is watching this. I hope you had a blast. Like, what a special night to go watch that. I'm glad the Pacers met the moment against like the pluckiest team of all time, the Knicks. I have a deep reverence for the Knicks and the fact that they have a bunch of players who are playing way above their expected impact. And the Pacers are taking it in stride. They've had injury luck. That much is known. But every time teams come out here and guys are hitting tough shots, they play a tough brand of basketball. The Pacers, they had to dig deep for this one. Super fun game.
And even just to add a little bit more context to the Nembhard shot, I think they're at a point there that, you know, that shot came off an offensive rebound from Aaron Nesmith. I didn't mention him a lot there, but he gets that tap out. It's a cross match for Tyrese against Hartenstein. He isn't going to be as likely to drive that given how gimpy he appeared to look after he had turned the ankle. Deuce McBride comes and hits that switch with switch to blitz, comes out at a very hard angle. So Andrew then has to lift higher. And I've asked questions. Everybody who's listened to this podcast knows I've been like, why is he turning 23-foot shots into 26-foot shots? In this case, he needed to stand that deep from the line, attacks Jalen Brunson, and then ends up stepping up in a huge moment by stepping back. So, again, I wrote an article about it. I think it's a pretty cool shot, even more so probably than the one he hit against the Lakers a year ago because he had to do a little bit of self-creation there as well. So, but you mentioned it. We can probably pivot from there a little bit. Your overall thoughts on the defensive adjustments. Aaron Nesmith starts the game on Jalen Brunson. Andrew Nembhard's guarding Josh Hart. Tyrese Halliburton on Dante DiVincenzo.
So I'll admit I'm getting some wisdom from the timeline here. Benji, in particular, the same way that you're able to highlight, a couple months ago, what's happening with Tyrese, hamstring stuff, the correlation in play. Benji was mentioning how Brunson was doing some things a little bit differently, maybe according to the foot, a little bit of a change in lift, maybe a little bit of change in explosion. That being said, Brunson is still a player of significant consequence. Nesmith stepping out there, knowing when to flip hips and chase. The Pacers doing a much better job. JJ called it out on the broadcast of not showing a body, but actually getting into the spot. Couple charges taken, good, meaningful rotations. And credit to Nesmith for funneling. And this is what we talked about. This is what Benji said in the preview. The best place to have Brunson, as much as they lament it on the broadcast, like, oh, he's in his office. He's doing like a bunch of dribble moves. He's in the middle of the paint. Brunson, the end ones, when he gets that step through, all this kind of stuff, that's the real meat of it. The jump shot is a great counter, but Nesmith kept him in front a lot, and especially early on. And that completely changed everything about this game. And I think Nesmith deserves a huge round of applause for the defense that he played. Aggressive, intentional, to the scheme, and blessed with athletic talent. He met the moment big time.
I think I come a little bit differently on it, actually.
Sure.
I think that the contests were better because he has more length. And I think that it was necessary. I mean, Rick mentioned it after the game that sometimes they found out in the Bucks series, they found out during the regular season at times, they would flip Nesmith and Nembhard back and forth on matchups. Like one of them might have somebody in the first half, they'd flip it in the second half because they like to show guys different looks. I think it was probably necessary. I mean, you and I kind of at the end of the last podcast, I was like, I don't know if I would necessarily flip defensive matchups because I like what Nembhard does with the overall screen nav. I still think Nembhard's screen navigation was better than Nesmith's at the beginning of plays. But I would probably agree with Benji to an extent. I think that there was a number of possessions where when you watch Brunson turning the corner, this is a lot less lift than what he was getting in games 1 and 2 to be able to get off those types of shots. Also, one benefit of putting Andrew over on Josh Hart and Tyrese on Dante DiVincenzo is they were more aggressive helping off of Josh Hart with help switches and peel switches, like what we mentioned in games 1 and 2, that weren't there because Andrew has a better feel for making those types of plays. So here, like Aaron's giving Brunson his left hand all the way to the rim, which I don't really think that you want to do, but Andrew slides over and takes that. And this is when Tyrese does make that great read to read the passing lane, in part because that peel switch occurred and allowed him to be more aggressive on the backside. Also, I think on some of these plays, when he is getting, like I said, I don't think the screen nav, his ability to stay skinny over the top was quite as good. So sometimes that was leading to switches that wouldn't have been happening in the prior game. So yes, like Aaron's limiting Jalen Brunson's shot attempts, but then this is a mismatch that you don't want. Hartenstein's getting a hook shot out of it a few times. They also ended up leaving Tyrese on islands against Jalen Brunson that weren't happening in the prior 2 games, where now this is having to be switched to blitz where you're having to put the defense into rotation. This actually does work out because when you bring a center to trap against Jalen Brunson, who doesn't have as much size per possession or per position, that's a deflection. But it happened a couple other times too, where I don't think necessarily you want the Pacers to be having to rotate quite that much. So I think that Aaron definitely competed. I think he deserves credit. I think they did everything that was asked of him. And I think that the contests are better because he has more length. But I do think that there was somewhat of a trickle down effect. And also because Dante DiVincenzo in December had his highest scoring game against the Pacers, 35 plus. He goes off for 35 plus again, and that isn't all on Tyrese, but a decent amount of it was with Tyrese guarding him and some of what the issues are with Tyrese when he's having to trail through more complicated off-ball screening action. So I do think there was a little bit of a give and take, and I do think that it worked somewhat in the Pacers' benefit because, like I've been saying with Tyrese in the prior games because of the back injury, I really don't think that Jalen was 100% throughout most of that game. So
we come away different levels of impressed with Aaron. I'm definitely more positive on Aaron's defense overall than you after this game.
I think I'm more positive on his actual defense. And like I said, the contests, I think that they gave up mismatches on the actual screens in places where you wouldn't necessarily want to. And I think that it was beneficial because Andrew was defending off ball and they were helping off of Josh Hart in better ways than what they were in the prior 2 games. In essence, I think Aaron was getting help that Andrew and TJ McConnell and whoever else was guarding Brunson in games 1 and 2 simply was not getting. They did not peel switch a single possession against Jalen Brunson when he got beat in those prior games. They did it last night.
Did you notice them doing that at all when Nembhard was his primary last night? No. Still just solo dolo?
Yep.
Yeah, he got put in
a lot of times in the times when I've seen the Pacers over the last 2 years, if they do next a pick and roll, if they do a jump switch, it's generally just based on his feel. And that's one benefit of using him as an off-ball defender, which might be a consideration for you. But it does put Tyrese then on somebody who's, as I tweeted during the game, burning down every cornfield in Indiana.
That's a good one. I would rather put DiVincenzo in that position. Just based on, I know DiVincenzo has been shooting the hell out of the basketball. I don't think last night is the expected outcome. And I would be pretty surprised if he's able to achieve that level of shooting repeatedly. And I know he was 5 of 9 or 5 for 12 in the past 2 games. I get that. Different type of volume. This was more like primary volume. This is not as much catch and shoot. This is gunning his ass off out of a dribble handoff. Coming out of a handoff, using an escape dribble immediately into space, stepping off the line with movement, with somebody chasing and banging a triple. I don't think it happens like that continuously going forward.
But on that one where he banged the triple off of the handoff, Andrew Nembhard was guarding him.
Right.
That was a difficult shot, but Andrew was guarding him, not Tyrese.
Right. But I'm to the point is I don't think you can expect him to have the same level of shooting, regardless of whether the contest is there or not. Whether it's Tyrese or whether it's Nembhard, I think that shot is just about as difficult. The contest is or the chase speeds you up. And I assume Tyrese would still, whether DiVincenzo is being chased by Nembhard or Tyrese, I think an escape
Did you
dribble out
see
of a
Opes
handoff.
from Team Germany make the 3 when he went off an off-ball screening action and Tyrese's footwork tripped him up and he fell and
No.
they lost to Team USA?
No, I don't think I watched that game.
Okay. Well, I have a little bit more concerns about Tyrese's off-ball footwork on those types of screening actions maybe than you do, but
regardless, I'm glad that Brunson got more focus and volume fell into the hands of DiVincenzo. DiVincenzo really met the moment. I don't think DiVincenzo can replicate these games over and over again.
He did, and I think he definitely made tough shots. I think he was making tougher shots than the timeline seemed to think that he was because, as I told you before we hopped on, his expected effective field goal percentage on the shots that he took was 47.8%. He outshot that by almost 10 percentage points, so 57.4 is what he shot. So I think that he did make some hard shots. I don't think all of them were hard. Like Tyrese kind of just stunting in no man's land, one pass away, and him bombing that one in, not a hard shot. When Dante popped and Obi was in drop and Pascal for some reason stayed attached to Josh Hart, that's not a hard shot. Ijax in transition, moving towards Deuce McBride instead of finding Dante DiVincenzo, that wasn't necessarily hard. But yeah, I mean, I think overall, like, I think you pressed the right buttons. I think that it's right to give him a different look. I just am remembering back in February, they had Nesmith guard Jalen Brunson to begin with in the first game in February. Nesmith fouls out, and that's why they flipped the matchup to Nembhard in the next matchup. So, like I said, Rick said it. Like, we like to flip them back and forth because we like the idea of giving guys different looks. They get comfortable. They know how that defender is going to guard them. We do something else. And, you know, like I said, if you have Nembhard off ball and he's more aggressive with some of the off ball stunts than maybe other people would have been off Josh Hart, more principled with it, then that's an added benefit. I do think that there was an effect of putting Tyrese on Dante DiVincenzo, though.
Do you think the playoff, there's a plane going, by the way. Do you think the playoff whistle or the playoff environment is beneficial to someone like Nesmith?
After what happened in game 2, most likely.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking too. Like, the Knicks benefit from playoff basketball. And I don't mean that in a bad way. Like, the Knicks, and the Wolves too, are a good example. Is like, let's up the intensity. Let's make the ref blow the whistle. And Nesmith is like, he's in there. And he's going to force it. And he only got called for 3 last night and should have been called for 4 definitively. Like, he fouled the hell out of Brunson on the one reach in, but the play progressed.
Right.
Obviously, the jump ball went a certain way. But, yeah, they got away with one there because that would have been 2 free throws at that point in the game. But, like, I like that switch a lot. I'm sure they'll toggle them going forward, as you point out. But, yep, credit to Rick for pulling that lever.
I would expect that they'll stick with Nesmith in the next game just so that they can maintain the length. Because, I mean, I was trying to think of outside-the-box ideas, and I'm like, they're not going to do it. But I was like, I might have, if they had ever worked on any zone during the regular season, I genuinely might have liked to see Siakam at the top of it, put Tyrese at the bottom, just because then you're not navigating as many screens, period. Use some of that length as containment against Brunson, and in this game, probably wouldn't have worked because they shot the heck out of the basketball. But I was like, they are going to be down by a shooter. OG Anunoby's not going to be out there. The Knicks did not perform well against zone during the regular season. They were 26th in zone efficiency. If you can mix in that a little bit, but like they found another way to be able to get length on him that didn't involve having to do something that they've never actually done during the regular season, given that they only played 10 possessions of zone. And I'm pretty sure that most of those were in full court situations where they dropped back out of press. But
we want to talk about grit. 13 offensive rebounds for Indiana, 10 for the Pacers, or the Knicks. Mm-hmm. And I'm pretty sure 13 turnovers for the Knicks, 10 for the Pacers. Winning the possession battle there is a huge deal. OG helps, him being out helps swing that. He's a big body. And even if he's not the one grabbing all the offensive rebounds, he requires a real box out. Yeah. And those can go elsewhere. The Pacers have impressed me a lot in this series, like meeting the intensity and meeting like the grit necessary with these Knicks, because the Knicks might be down a Julius Randle, now OG, but they still bring it to you and you still have to meet it. And we watched a much worse Bucks team bring it to the Pacers, and the Pacers didn't have anything like they've shown in games 1 and games 3 in particular. Very impressed on that end. They still need a lot. They still need a lot. But, man, the physicality, they found a way. And it doesn't start with Tyrese, but I'm pretty impressed with Tyrese kind of factoring that into how he attacks on offense. There's some gumption. Tyrese had the gumption.
Yeah, I mean, he tried to drive in over multiple defenders and landed on his back, which has clearly been a problem for him. And it looked like it locked up pretty shortly after he had done that. So the fact that he did it instead of avoiding doing that speaks to it. And even just giving credit to Miles Turner on that possession prior to when Nembhard made the game winner, Nembhard misses 2 threes, but Miles left his rebounding area twice to go track down those rebounds on the move and be able to get those kickouts. So also big plays for him, even though he didn't score down the stretch of the game. He did get the chase down block. He did get extra chances, even though they didn't convert.
I'm impressed.
Can we flip to the other side a little bit? Because contrast to the prior 2 games, the Pacers were not playing with a lead when the starters came back into this game.
Mm-hmm.
The bench. Why do you think that TJ McConnell and Obi Toppin didn't have quite the same impact that they did in games 1 and 2?
The pace of the game was a little bit different, I found. Obi didn't get to play in open space the same way. And also was seeing like a little bit of tighter closeouts. When Obi is at his best, he's getting open threes. Some of them have been quick trigger, and credit to him for like a higher pickup point on his jumper than he used to have. But he's so good at eating up space in the open court. And there just wasn't as much available last game. And that one's easy for Obi. And for TJ, I mean, there was less lanes available for him to finish. And it was less often that he found himself finishing directly at the glass as it was that he was on his last step, fading even a little bit more so than he's been accustomed to. Sometimes his mid-range jumper is working with momentum to the rim. Quick stop and pop. They both seemed overextended, and that's normal. We're not going to harp on them. They weren't 2 of the best players for the Pacers in last night's game, as they had been in games before, particularly games 2 and game 6. Just they're bench guys. You take the big blow-up games when you can, and you have to be able to wade in the water if the bench doesn't come through. How do you do that? You get 21 and 10 from Miles. You get 35, 4 and 7 from Tyrese on high efficiency. You get a tidy little 26 and 7 from Pascal. And you get a lot of care on the defensive end. That's how you tread water when an expected strength that you've had doesn't show up. Strength showed up elsewhere.
I don't think anything contextually necessarily changed for the 2 of them that much, other than the fact that the Pacers did play an even bigger lineup because they wanted to match Nesmith with Brunson as much as possible. So there were lineups out there that it was like TJ, Nesmith, Obi, Siakam, Ijax. Those groups haven't played together. That's not a lot of extra creation outside of TJ. And then during those minutes, Obi's being guarded by Deuce McBride. And there were a couple times where he tried to duck in, didn't necessarily get a touch. Then it ends up being like a grenade DHO out of the post. And I don't think you necessarily want like what could have been a duck in for Obi against Deuce McBride to become a grenade DHO for a 3 from TJ McConnell. Yeah. So some of that little bit of wonkiness I felt. There's even a couple possessions where he had like Isaiah Hartenstein didn't see that Miles had ducked in, and then they're getting out of possession. I mean, he just didn't get a lot of shot attempts, as you had mentioned. TJ, I feel like some of his misses were very makeable, and he just didn't make them in this particular game, which is going to happen. I thought he had shots at the rim, especially at the end of the third quarter, that were kind of some point-blank chippies that didn't go his way. And then, unfortunately, those point-blank chippies ended up turning into Josh Hart one-man fast break, 94-foot drives again. So that was kind of where the swing went, and that's somewhat what you have to give and take with TJ Ball at times. Like, TJ Ball is great when he's applying press and really pushing the pace and being a motorboat, getting the ball up the floor and immediately getting to the rim. When you don't make that shot and he potentially falls down, then that's one of the most fast breakable misses in the NBA. And when it's against lineups with one of the best transition scorers in Josh Hart, it becomes a little bit more damaging. I don't know that I necessarily think that's going to continue. I don't necessarily think it's something that the Pacers have to be like, hey, this changed in this game. Therefore, what do we need to change to make sure that they get back on track? I think it's relatively fixable. going back, if they can get both units clicking at the same time, obviously this wouldn't have been a particularly close game. Between that and then the Knicks just cooling off at the end of the game. I mean, they had shot over 60% from three through the first three quarters, and then I believe went 1 of 9 once the starters for the Pacers came back on the floor.
It's also like TJ, similar to what we talked about with Pascal. Pascal started off the playoffs gangbusters on a huge amount of volume from the short mid-range. Had sustained a bit of a like slow streak from there, but he's a big, so he sustains like field goal percentage a little bit different than TJ does. TJ is an incredible short mid-range shooter. Still, those types of shots, you can have a game where it just like it gets away from you.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean, and it could immediately revert back to what it has been, however many games, but that shot in particular can really get away from you, especially since it's so available for volume if you want it. And TJ wants it. Like, if you're willing to, if you're a good short mid-range shooter and you're somebody who likes volume, you can take 12 shots in 8 minutes and you can do it very quickly. And yeah, TJ, it's just, you don't always have your best game.
Yeah. Just a contrast from what it was in the prior two. But I do want to get your thoughts because obviously the Pacers were the healthier team in this game. They have a lead. They give up the lead. They have to be able to come back, show the grittiness that they show. One thing that kept standing out to me throughout the game is how they're defending the off-ball movement, setter receiver actions between DiVincenzo and Isaiah Hartenstein. So I just wanted to get your thoughts because you and I haven't really talked about this much, about how they're guarding Isaiah Hartenstein as a DHO hub above the break or out of delay. So like if you just look at this static screenshot before I even play the clip, what is your thoughts of this coverage? If it's a little bit blurry, just to point people out, that's Obi in the corner defending Josh Hart, Aaron Nesmith defending Alec Burks, and Andrews chasing Dante DiVincenzo over the top of a wide pin with TJ there, and Isaiah Jackson has his heels outside the three-point line against Isaiah Hartenstein.
Does Isaiah, like, once it becomes the point of attack, does Isaiah switch here? Or is he playing at the level or in drop?
It doesn't actually get that far, but I am curious to know just off the top.
Because
what do you think of him playing that high against Isaiah Hartenstein if you're going to be chasing Dante DiVincenzo over and lock and trail?
Then that's too high, I think. If you were switching or you wanted to like blow up an action, I think being that high might be good because then he can get like parallel explosively instead of having to like step up to meet a guy. But if they're playing in drop, that doesn't make much sense to me, I don't think.
Yeah, they didn't switch Isaiah out in this game. They had him playing in drop when the actions happened. But in this case, DiVincenzo curls it. Andrew's pointing for TJ to switch. The switch doesn't happen in time. That's an easy cut. And because your big's playing that high up the floor, there's nobody back to be able to protect the rim. This happened fairly repeatedly in this game where, again, Tyrese is going to be in lock and trail. Dante DiVincenzo uses a misdirection cut. Miles has his heels outside the free throw line against Isaiah Hartenstein. Now it's a wide open look. And the other thing that I would point out and ask what you thought of in this game as well is Precious Achiuwa starting at the 4, Pascal Siakam defending Precious Achiuwa at the 4, not really sagging off or really providing a lot of like flooding over to the strong side in this game and helping off of Precious Achiuwa as much as people might have assumed. So that ends up being a shot at the rim that he actually ends up missing. But over and over again, another lock and trail one. This one, Andrew really fights through it, but uses that pivot, and then it's a late bounce pass to Dante DiVincenzo. That's a tough shot that he ends up making. This one, just backdoor cut from Dante DiVincenzo, no bigs back, nobody helping off of Precious Achiuwa again, easy shot at the rim. This one, a Chicago action. Andrew gets clipped by the pin down. They switch up the line with Aaron Nesmith, and he rises up and shoots over the switch. So before I show you those clips, just like generally, if you're running a Chicago action and Dante DiVincenzo is going to be the receiver of that play with Isaiah Hartenstein at the top of the key, what is your preferred method for guarding that? Because nothing they were doing in this game particularly worked, although I will side with you and say that the one shot that he made with Andrew trailing there was a very tough shot to make, and he just happened to make it.
I think that second three is also kind of difficult.
Shooting over the top of Aaron Nesmith on the switch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm fine with both those coverages. Dante DiVincenzo to me is not Ray Allen. I might sound crazy. And if Dante continues to shoot like this, then like shame on me. Dante DiVincenzo cannot undo everything about your defense. Like he can't change base packages to me.
Can I interrupt really quick and just say though that those ones were with Andrew and Aaron guarding, which given the defensive matchup change, the other ones were with Tyrese guarding, where they're giving up very easy back cuts. And if Tyrese is going to be guarding Dante DiVincenzo, those are the ones that are more concerning when you're giving up wide open cuts at the rim and nobody's there to protect. I guess I'll funnel your attention to there.
I would switch.
You'd switch the wide pin.
Yeah. I think like, and then if the Knicks are trying to get the ball elsewhere, like you can always, depending on how fast they go, like you can switch some back or you can try and hang in on some possessions. But that kind of stuff, especially since DiVincenzo, I don't think is a significant risk to like be crazy off the bounce. You might be able to get him to move the ball on, which offers you an opportunity to get back into your original matchups. Now they can like play around with it separately, of course, and like maybe he can automatic into something that further convolutes what your matchups might be and get you in a messier position. But I think my lean would be to try and make DiVincenzo put the ball on the floor in some respect, move the ball on, and then try and get back into your shell once that happens.
Yeah, to me, I think you have a couple options. You can drop the big all the way back and expect the other four players to apply maximum pressure so that you're not vulnerable to the DHOs and the rise and fire. I think playing a big with their heels outside the three-point line with Hartenstein wheeling up top is fairly extreme to be unprotecting that rim that much. Or when Precious Achiuwa is on the floor, you're just all the way off of him and using that person as a secondary rim protector. Or you're top locking Dante DiVincenzo and keeping everybody else in place. Because if you're playing that high because you're afraid of the rise and fire out of the DHO, why don't you just top lock Dante DiVincenzo and play everybody else straight up?
Do you think
the same way that the Knicks are doing against Tyrese? They're not top locking anybody else but Tyrese.
Do you think the communication is like? What do you think about how the Pacers top lock typically? Have you seen it
based
often?
on those coverages? None of those are consistent. They're doing something different on every single one. Which this is a lot of times my confusion when I watch their defense. What is it that you're willing to live with, and what are you trying to take away? Are you willing to live with a Precious Achiuwa 3? Are you willing to live with Isaiah Hartenstein potentially taking you off the dribble above the break? Are you willing to live with Dante DiVincenzo rise and fire? It's changing rapidly throughout the game, and it doesn't necessarily seem like, hey, we made this adjustment in the huddle, now we want to try this. It more seems like they're just making it up on the fly. Whatever people are communicating in the moment seems to me what the coverage ends up being. And I don't know that I don't know that I agree with that approach. Sometimes it has to be that way because maybe something goes wrong and you have to communicate in the moment. I think you should be going into a game and being like, the Knicks have a very clear thing that they're doing against Tyrese on every single thing that he does. If he's running a side pick and roll, we are weakening him left and going weak to switch. If he's coming off of delay action, we are top locking him unilaterally. And we know what that coverage is. It doesn't look like the Pacers know what the coverage is to me.
So this is like, what was it? Episode 2 of Ready to Diagram, predictable defense. Was that episode 1 or 2?
2.
2. Predictable defense is something that creators can, I guess, exploit. Do you think, and like the Pacers have had a little bit of trouble seeing the Knicks' predictability and still like having the creativity to go against that as they take away Tyrese. I wonder if it makes sense to be predictable for the Pacers because they haven't been, right? And kind of make the Knicks lean on creation elsewhere. Like really take something away and make them look to create from a different point. I think that makes sense. Although, as you say, that's just not been the case.
And I think that's a really good point because like, I think you said it before we hopped on here. Maybe you said it while we were on this podcast, but you're like, a lot of Dante's plays he doesn't continue advantages.
Yeah.
They begin and end with his shots. If that's the case, then the predictable defense makes more sense because it's not going to continue on somewhere else necessarily. I mean, our pals who are on the Ready to Diagram podcast know that I'm a big fan of unpredictable defense. If I were a team, I'd be looking for defenders who are capable of doing that. Somebody who can break from scheme without compromising scheme. That's a really big asset in today's NBA guys like Alex Caruso. Really, the only player that fits that mold for the Pacers right now is Andrew Nembhard, like what I showed earlier with the peel switch. He's somebody that has that degree of feel and can help in a unique position or somewhere where that defender may not be expecting that help rotation. I don't feel like the Pacers as a whole communicate those changes on the fly very well. This is the Knicks out of the exact same actions. You can see that Dante DiVincenzo top blocking Tyrese. They're going to take that away. Then it ends up just being flowing into a handoff with Nesmith. Same thing here. Top blocking that action. And the Knicks, as you mentioned, you would switch the pin down. That allows them to funnel that switch right into Josh Hart. It's easy. That's neutralized. And then I do give Miles a lot of credit here because, again, offense stalls out and he puts the ball on the floor with his left and actually finishes with his left. I have not seen him do that very often. But point being is that's what the Knicks are doing. And Miles had to call an audible there to get around it.
And that's the predictable versus unpredictable thing. If Miles is a good driver, right, at that position, and he knows that they're going to run that out, and he still has his dribble, and you know that side of the floor is going to be preoccupied, you have space to put Hartenstein in movement and try and get to the rim. And that's knowing the predictability of it. But that's Miles Turner. He's not going to be able to do that every time. The Pacers haven't had guys who can do that every time. And DiVincenzo is a pretty linear player. His linearity has led to incredible results so far. But I do think if you put him in positions where it has to be a couple dribbles down and you're making decisions, sure, he hit that pull-up too. That was nice to see. But if you can make him take an escape dribble, if you can make him reroute away from the rim, not to the rim, like all this kind of stuff, you might be in a better position.
And the difference being there is Isaiah is playing Miles much higher because Miles does make and take threes. Like in the reverse of this situation, this is why I said, like, if I were the Pacers, I would be taking a page right from that and being like, look, we're just going to top block Dante and that's it. Especially if we feel like what you said, if you feel much stronger about Nesmith on Brunson moving forward and these need to be the matchups, then I feel like Tyrese needs to top block Dante. Tyrese needs to know this is the coverage against Dante and then play the big, not with their heels outside the 3-point line against Hartenstein. Make him make a play in space. How do you feel about his, by comparison to what we just watched from Miles, if the big is playing off of him and it's sagged at least to the free throw line and you're top blocking and then having somebody at the rim to protect against a back cut if Dante were to back cut the top block, is Isaiah going to, how creative do you think he's going to be with that amount of wiggle room and space to do something off the dribble against Isaiah Jackson or Miles Turner?
I think the most creative thing Hartenstein would do is just like dribble to the next action, which you're keeping things above the break. Or what I've seen him do a few times is like that pass is made downhill regardless, and he's cutting into the space. But like that's still, you're probably keeping things in front of you. You are making sure that it's like probably a Hartenstein 10, 12-foot push shot, which I know he's been effective on. But, you know, the Knicks don't want their offense to be comprised of just like Hartenstein 10 to 12-foot push shots. I think you put more pressure on him, you will have your defense playing in front of the offense more often than not. You'll keep the play in front of you.
Yeah, because, I mean, even if he changes sides of the floor and wheels over to the left, then at that point, your other defenders, I think you feel better about, okay, we can continue to be in lock and trail and chase that over the top. Yeah. More so than what you're seeing with Dante being a combined version of Steph and Clay currently. So
he's been so awesome. Like, he's really fun to watch. That it started with that three he hit against the 76ers, that big one, the ball squirts out, the game winner. And then gangbusters, man. He's shooting what, like 58, 60% on threes on just insane volume and increasingly difficult volume. This has been awesome. And back cuts, well-timed, making good reads off the ball. Make him dribble a little bit more is definitely he or Hartenstein. Make those guys dribble.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another question, I guess, that I have from you from those clips, because the other option would have been, you know, have Pascal sag aggressively off, hope that he can make rotations as a secondary rim protector. Why do you think the Pacers aren't playing off of Precious Achiuwa that much? Based on what you know of Precious with the Raptors, because you have way more context to go off of than I do.
Precious is a good cutter. And Pascal fouls a lot. I think it's it's one of those two things more than the other one, but it's both of those things.
Can I show you something really quick?
Yeah.
I'm glad that was your answer because it provides the most fitting time to bring up a very strange possession for me. So Jalen Brunson gets baseline with his left, and Tyrese is guarding Dante DiVincenzo. Pascal is guarding Precious Achiuwa. And it is Tyrese as the low man who rotates over to stop the drive from Jalen Brunson, even though he's the one guarding Dante DiVincenzo. Pascal kind of in somewhat of a no man's land, virtually, a blade curved cut there from Precious Achiuwa coming around the rim and Pascal then being late and fouling. So part of me wondered, I don't really know why they weren't having Pascal automatically be the secondary rim protector in that setting so that Tyrese could then zone up the weak side and potentially step in front. But to your point, if Precious is a very explosive cutter, then Tyrese isn't probably going to do a whole lot to wall him off in that situation either.
Last year, I don't know about this year, but last year, Precious was 93rd in points per chance on cuts. He's very explosive. He wasn't that high in frequency, but he's, to my eye, covering Precious, pretty good knack for especially the 45 or the curved cut. He times up drives really well to come into them. There's that. There's maybe proximity to Achiuwa because of offensive rebounding. There's the fact that Pascal's effectiveness as the low man has waned and he fouls more. There's a lot of stuff intersecting there. So pick whichever one you want.
Yeah, I think we're probably on the same page there because I saw that as what was floated a lot for the Pacers as this could be their adjustment. OG Anunoby isn't out there. If they're going to start Precious at the 4, they could have been more aggressive helping off of him. Somebody even made that comment when I shared a couple of the clips of TJ, and I was like, I'm not seeing a massive, huge defensive upgrade here to what it was being billed like on the broadcast when TJ had gotten back cut pretty aggressively by Jalen Brunson. And they're like, well, doesn't that get fixed if Pascal's all the way off of Precious Achiuwa? And I'm like, I just think that there are reasons why they aren't having him help off because they're not having him do it. So I wanted to get that context from you because you've seen a lot more of him.
I'm very confident in those reads of those two players. Yes.
On the Pascal front, I agree with you based on what I've seen with the Pacers, but I hadn't seen enough of the rest. But those were kind of the things that I wanted to run down and talk about. But was there any other major things that you noticed from this game that you wanted to run past me?
What do you think of the front court shot making 3 games into the series? Because the front court, the Pacers are supposed to be winning this series in the front court. Mm-hmm. That's baseline. What have you made of more so Pascal and Miles than the rest of the guys, obviously, but what are your thoughts been on the front court overall, I suppose?
Well, this game was a more favorable environment, right? Because Pascal did okay against the OG matchup in the first game. We both talked about that. He didn't have the best game in the second game, relied more on the mid-range for reasons that you had laid out, I feel, pretty astutely. And this one, when he's getting Josh Hart, I felt that they were better and more active, not only in just recognizing, hey, he has deep post position and transition, but also more so than I've seen, giving him clear outs and getting the other 3 people the heck on the opposite side of the floor and just letting him go to work against that mismatch. And the Knicks to this point weren't really doubling that much in this game. They were willing to kind of live with that and see what he was going to give them, being more aggressive to get to the free throw line. Miles overall, I felt like had a better game. Like I said, those 2 drives that I've seen from him, I can probably count on one hand how many times I've seen him do that. I think that they both were somewhat underwhelming in game 2. At the other end of the floor, I think there was some screen navigation stuff that made life easier a few times on Isaiah Hartenstein in ways that it wasn't there for different reasons. It's what you're willing to give up. Yeah. Or you're probably more willing to live with, hey, at least we're getting better contests from Aaron against Jalen Brunson than we're giving up these mismatches. It was a trickle-down effect, but maybe that's what we'll be willing to live with if we can shut down these other things. So I think that there was that component of it. But yeah, I think that they should probably be handily winning it, and they were much closer to doing that in this game. And the 3 stars for the Pacers, if you're going to include Miles, Tyrese, Pascal. Miles is what you had said at the end of the last podcast, right? They needed to provide a reason so it's not a talking point whether Obi and TJ needed to be in at the end of the game. And not to degrade Obi and TJ, but because they needed to establish themselves and what they're capable of doing in the way that they did last night.
And there's no way to construe it as degrading those guys. Mm-hmm. Everyone is aware of the structure of the NBA. Everyone knows what is expected of guys who slot into certain salaries, who get a certain amount of the ball, who arrive to the playoffs, and there's a hierarchy. The players aren't fighting the hierarchy. They understand it. TJ and Obi know the hierarchy. And as role players, because they're on the Pacers, they have more carte blanche to step up into big volume roles than a lot of players do on other teams. But they still understand, like, I'm TJ McConnell, I'm Obi Toppin. Those guys are paid the big bucks. These guys are billed as the stars. The Pacers, if they want to punch up at getting to the Eastern Conference Finals, if they want to hang out in this series, you need all of them to play well. But like Pascal Siakam being plus 15 in 30 minutes, Miles Turner being like plus 20 or plus 26, I can't remember. Tyrese, those guys dominating their minutes. That's why they won the game. And those guys are supposed to be more consistent. It wouldn't be TJ McConnell's fault or Obi Toppin's fault if the Pacers lost last game and you're like, well, TJ and Obi didn't play as well. They weren't like a plus 12 when that's what we've come to expect. They didn't score 13 and 18 points. To be like, why do they have to do that every game? There's other guys who have exhibited their ability to outperform other front courts. There's guys who have exhibited their ability to win games on their own. They should be able to do this collectively together. There's enough money. There's enough talent. There's enough like belief in a starting unit. Go win minutes as the starting unit. Don't have a guy who has all NBA / max contract aspirations. Don't have a guy who is like surely a budding star in the NBA. Don't have like a, on the periphery of all-star status center in your starting lineup with two scrappy defenders rounding it out in Aaron and Nembhard and just like be like, well, we don't win the starters minutes. No, win the starters minutes. Better performances. Play better. Be the better team. And then if TJ and Obi play really good, you might be providing the knockout punch in the third quarter. You might be providing it early in the fourth. Then why not both? It can be good. So, yeah.
And I think it's entirely possible that they could get both. They might get both in game 4. I mean, I think that's on the table. That's why I wanted to point out some of the stuff about the bench, because I don't think it necessarily was like, hey, this is a reason why those two people struggled. I think it was sometimes shots for TJ aren't going to go in at an otherworldly clip as they have been. And just to add context in case people didn't fully understand the point I was making on the prior podcast, it wasn't like a resume thing, because I know people were like, well, why do Nembhard and Nesmith have more of a resume to deserve to be in the starting lineup or automatically be in the closing lineup than TJ? That wasn't the point I was trying to make. I was saying that if you're having to have a question about whether you need to have a backup point guard out there in TJ, who is someone who is going to need to orchestrate the offense because of the spacing concerns if he's off the ball, that's saying a lot about the way the starting lineup is performing versus when you close with Nembhard or Nesmith, it's not automatic that they have to run offense for you. Hence why Nembhard made the big shot at the end of the game that he stepped up and made. Like, it's just a different dynamic between the players that are going to be out there in those units. That was what I was attempting to say. It wasn't like a pecking order of, oh, I'm degrading TJ to a second unit, like a lower status than Nembhard and Nesmith in some specific way. It's just the dynamic of how they have to be used.
I expect the Pacers to win Ijax, Obi, Pascal, TJ plus whoever minutes. I think they might. And this commentary doesn't mean like, oh, Obi and TJ, the jig is up. No, they just get to have an off game, you know, and it could snap back immediately. But more than ever in the NBA, context is king. Like players have such specific skill sets. Defenses have become hyper specific in what they ask of players, that meshing together, because the 65th best player in the NBA now can do a lot, like a lot. And you have to think more about like how the high end players mesh with certain guys and constructing lineups. TJ, I made the case last episode that like I would have put him in instead of Nesmith. Nesmith was a hero in game 3, right? And TJ dominated his minutes in game 2 and has dominated many different minutes. But TJ is a very specific player who dominates very specific things, and finding ways.
Sometimes in very specific limited bursts when he had already played 10 straight minutes.
And finding ways to maximize him, and knowing that, and that's a coach's job, right? Is sometimes it looks like there's more there, and you never find out if there is or isn't. But if then you play this game and there wasn't more there for TJ, so we're not really worried about it. And the Stars made sure that, like, hey, we don't have to care whether TJ McConnell had another like 7 minutes of tightly packed stardom in him, because he might not have had that in game 2. He may not have saved the day, and we would have known. And then it would have been like, well, maybe Neesmith could have been a good, or Nembhard could have been a good, or like his Nembhard hit the game winner last game. It's just, coaching is really difficult in that you have to look at guys who are succeeding in certain contexts and say, would they succeed in this one right now with different defensive coverages? And I don't know if Rick was right or wrong. I advocated for something that looks maybe silly after game 3, and that's what it is. You're advocating for unknowns. But the good thing is TJ probably better in game 4. Obi probably better in game 4. And hopefully the Stars stay just as good. Fingers crossed. Be a good team, Indiana. Meet the moment. That's what we want.
And maybe they won't come up against an epic heater from Alec Burks out of nowhere as well.
13 points, 4 of 4 shooting, jab, hand in the face, looking a guy in the eye. Man.
There was definitely a stretch of the first half at one point in time where the Pacers were missing very easy shots around the basket, and the Knicks were draining very difficult shots out on the perimeter and out of difficult actions. So
it's
I feel
about
like
a bucket. The game is about a bucket. It is the agrarian economy of buckets.
And that's a good place to pivot it, because if you like Samson's shirt, that's going to be for sale very soon. So, inspired by his words from the first preview pod we did when he was talking about the idea of the Bucks and what might happen if they played drop coverage against Tyrese Haliburton. And now, coincidentally, it's released, I should say, after a very big game from Tyrese, and also Nembhard, after not making barely any shots, making the biggest shot of his career at the end of the game. So, the agrarian economy of buckets in a good place after game 3.
Grown crops.
And because I've been very bad at promoting myself, and I am bad at promoting myself in general, I would just go on ahead on here and say that I'm used to these videos when I was doing stuff on my own during the regular season. They were private, that was just getting sent to people's inboxes. Now that these are public, if you like the things that Samson and I are saying here, you do have the option to go and subscribe at patreon.com/basketballshewrote. If you do that, even if you sign up as a free member, then this will get emailed directly to you. Samson's recaps will get emailed directly to you. And then if you really like those things and you want to read the piece that I wrote about Nembhard's game winner, the other stuff that I wrote about Tyrese earlier in the series and from last series, those are paywalled and that's available to you. So give us a whirl.
Do you feel like you've gone against the brand when I tweet out like, hey, I wrote this thing, and under it says basketball she wrote? Do you think that we're like, it's no longer a feminist movement in basketball? Like, we betrayed it?
I think it even more so is, in a way, because
yes.
you've come over and want to contribute your words.
Yeah.
Under my banner, which I appreciate and value. So
it is the banner, that's what I've heard anyway.
Some people think so. The people includes you, and that's the list.
I'm the guy, yeah.
But glad we got to talk about a fun basketball game from the Pacers. Glad that they met the moment, matched the grit of the Knicks for a game, and hopefully they continue to do so, and both teams continue providing fun basketball that we can talk about after game 4 as well. So we'll talk to you then.